volume should be quite, should be quite low. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, and to Hillary's point and to Kevin's, nothing's ever going to beat cash in terms of the ability to money launder. But when you talk about Bitcoin, to acquire the Bitcoin, you have to go to either somebody in person through local Bitcoins or an exchange. So at that stage, the person selling the Bitcoin or the company selling the Bitcoin should be following their AML KYC requirements. Now, when they come to the actual gaming provider, there can be additional AML KYC requirements, but it's just a Bitcoin in transaction typically from there. So there's actually a couple of layers. Now, if they're working with the actual exchange too, then they also can verify when that Bitcoin was purchased and how it was purchased. So there's many things to get around the money laundering, but again, back to no situation is ever going to be perfect. So we're just trying to find the perfect way.
Look, is there anyone in this room that thinks that the way that the world currently combats money laundering is good? Like, is it working well? And let's be frank, like the amount of money that gets laundered each day through Bitcoin is a very small fraction of what the major banks in the world launder each day. Are you talking about Bitcoin as innovation in the field of money laundering? Look, the combat of money laundering. I'm sorry.
To use Bitcoin or not?
Well, the combat of money laundering is not an area of expertise of mine, so I'm going to answer that question as a layman or as a professional in the field of Bitcoin. And that is basically, yeah. Sorry, could you ask the last part of your question again?
Well, actually, can I just maybe I'll quickly comment on that. One of the things we didn't cover at the very beginning, in the basics of Bitcoin, is that there is a finite number of Bitcoin out there. Right now, there are 12 million, approximately 12 million Bitcoin, and you can, at $500, that means that the total market value of all the Bitcoin that exist, $6 billion US. Most of the transactions being done in Bitcoin are very small. If somebody and I mean very small. If somebody comes along and they suddenly try to move several $1 million or several $100,000 US in one transaction, it's going to pop up. Okay. Could you break that down and run it through all the different things and then all the way back up? Yes, you can. Okay. Can you do that with banking? Yes. The 80s, that was the 1980s. So does Bitcoin make it easier to launder money? No, but if I want to launder money, I can open a restaurant. Right? There's always a way to do it. What Bitcoin really does, because most of the transactions in Bitcoin are not large transactions necessarily, and so anything over a certain amount, the network, the community will notice because it's written into the blockchain. People actually also go through when stuff pops up in the news, and they can go back through and they try and piece it back together and to see where, the origins of large transactions and things like that. So the point with Bitcoin is all the information is out there. The banks don't put their information out there for the average public to go through and check everybody's transactions, even if you just mark the names out, right? So this is actually open. How people use it, we're here advocating in part that it has advantages for the gaming industry. There are a lot of other areas that it would be advantageous to adopt as well. Have people used it for criminal things? Yes, but as we said, cash is king.
But the way that you could control money laundering in a phenomenon like Bitcoin is there's always going to be a point of transaction if there's a large transaction where you can do a verification of some kind, right? So if you're going to go buy Bitcoin, if you wanted to buy a small amount of Bitcoin, that'd be really easy to do anonymously. If you wanted to go buy several $1 million worth of Bitcoin, they'd need to know who you were. And And if they, that's kind of where you would stop it. You'd stop a party from selling a very large sum or buying a very large sum of Bitcoin. And then it's fine. Like if you're talking about really small quantities, and this is not a problem anyway.
It's the way they've certainly controlled money laundering through the directives in Europe, is to look at it as not you can't eradicate all use of cash, but they've looked at at regulating it by way of positive identification over 2,000 euros, which in some cases is not practicable. And when the fourth money laundering directive comes on, and it will apply to betting and on-track betting, there's going to be a huge problem. But I see that as much more of a ticking time bomb, really, rather than agitating a what is still currently at the moment quite low volume transactions.
Just one thing, again, maybe rolling back to the beginning and a little bit of basics. If I want to buy Bitcoin, how do I do it? And what's involved with the process as a user, not as a operator?
It would depend where in the world you were located and how much you wanted to buy. If you were in Europe, there's exchanges all around Europe where you can send them a wire transfer. Your exchange account is funded, and you can make a peer-to-peer purchase off another seller in a marketplace. There's ATM machines all over the world. It's becoming increasingly easy to buy Bitcoin, but it's very local specific. If you were in Hong Kong, just an example, because I live in Hong Kong, there's an ATM under the escalator on Wellington Street. Go put some cash in, it'll spit out some Bitcoin. That's awesome. Or you can send it to one of 3 different exchanges in Hong Kong dollars or in US dollars, and then you can buy Bitcoin on the exchange. If you're in Latin America, if you're in Argentina, again, there's a local exchange in Argentina. You're sending your pesos and you can buy your Bitcoin. Or you can go to a 7-Eleven, buy a stored value card and use that to buy your Bitcoin.
So, quick question on that. Know your client requirements. They're present, yes, no, sometimes, depending.
As Hillary says, it's the same. It depends on the transaction volume. You can't go and put $200,000 into an ATM machine and buy Bitcoin that way. So, yeah, if you're buying really small amounts, then you can probably do it skirting a KYC requirement. But if you're buying any substantial volume, you'd have to go through a KYC process with a conscientious exchange.
Yeah, and to touch on that, one of the best methods is just in a peer-to-peer setting. There are several sites, including Local Bitcoins,